Hey guys, welcome to day one of your 100-day journey. And today we're going to learn about printing, commenting, debugging, string manipulation, and variables. So it's chock-a-block full of really fun stuff. And by the end of today, you will have created a band name generator program. So you can also head over to this web address, band-name-generator-end.appbury.repl.run. Alternatively, if you didn't want to type that whole line of URL in, you could also go to the previous lesson where I showed you where the course resources are, and we've got links to all of these resources where you can just click on it and head over there straight away. So this is the final project of today. And the idea is that, let's say that your friend was starting a new band, a rock band or a classical band, and they're struggling to come up with a good name. So you come into the rescue and send them your band name generator program. So it asks you for the name of the city that you grew up in. So mine was Bristol in the southwest of the UK. And then it'll ask you what's the name of your pet. I had a pet rabbit when I was younger, and I am probably the least imaginative person, classic programmer personality. So I called my rabbit Rabbit. So now when I hit enter, it's going to give me my band name, and it could be Bristol Rabbit. So that sounds pretty cool. It could be like a rock band. So this is what you're going to make, and in the process, in order to create this, you're going to learn about printing, inputting, commenting, debugging, name errors, syntax errors, string manipulation, variables, and a whole lot more. So if you feel like you can already achieve this and you can prove it by making this program yourself, then feel free to skip to the next day's lessons. But for most of you, even if you've started learning Python programming, there's probably still a lot of new things that you'll find in today's lessons. So once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started and get coding straight away. To begin, open up your browser and head over to this URL, repl.it/@appbury/day-1-printing-start. Now, if you didn't want to type all of that out and make some typos and errors and not get to the right place, then simply just head over to the course resources and click on the link there. It'll take you directly to this page. Now, once you've clicked on the link that takes you to the starting Replit, you should see something that looks like this. And the first thing I want you to do is to go ahead and click on the fork button. What this is going to do is it's going to create a version of that same Replit that you'll see me working through in the videos, but in this case, you'll be able to edit it. Now, notice how up here I've got anonymous showing up. That means that when I close down this Replit, I won't be able to save it in a place that I'll be able to easily get back to. So if you want to save the work that you're doing, I recommend signing up to Replit. It's completely free. You don't need any credit cards or anything. And then you'll be able to see a record of all of the code that you've written throughout the course. In this course, you'll be coding along with me on Replit and completing a whole bunch of interactive coding exercises in our Replit classroom. So pause this video now and create your free Replit account. And once you're signed in, then you can actually go ahead and edit the name of the Replit or add a brief description, and you'll be able to access it later on through the My REPLs folder. Now, once you've done that, then let's go ahead and walk through some of the different parts of Replit that you'll be using. First, on the left-hand side pane here, you've got some files, and you can see the current file that's open is this Python file here. And you can create new files or you can create new folders, and later on we'll be using these features to organize our code. Now, the other part of the left-hand side pane that's really useful is this settings tab here. And I generally prefer to code using a darker background. It's slightly easier on my eyes, especially when you're working at night. And I recommend everybody to switch their font size up to large. This just makes it so much easier to identify mistakes and any typos you make. Now, we're going to leave everything else as it is, and you can click on the settings button to collapse that pane so that you end up with more space for writing code. And this area here is where you're going to be doing that. All of your code is going to go inside here, and once we're done with writing our code, we'll click run and it will execute, and the results of our code will come up over on the console in the right here. Now, another really cool feature of Replit is they'll actually create a web address for your console output. And this is how in the last lesson you were able to see me run a version of the final code that we'll write at the end of today, and you were able to play around with it because of this feature. So you can share this with your friends once you've built apps or once you've built projects, and they'll be able to use and experience what it is that you've made. So these are some of the most important parts of Replit, but the important thing is it allows us to just get started. Now remember that the whole reason why we're learning to program is to be able to tell the computer what it needs to do and for it to follow our commands. So let's go ahead and tell the computer to do something. And we're going to do that by writing our first line of code. So in this case, I'm creating something called a print function, which is just the word print, all in lowercase, and then followed by a set of parentheses. Now, inside these parentheses, I'm going to tell it what I want it to print. And hopefully it's going to output that inside our console. So I'm going to start off by writing the classic hello world inside here. And then once you're ready, then go ahead and click run. After a few seconds, you should see the computer follow your command, namely printing the words that you told it to print inside the console or the output area over here. And once it's done, it indicates that with the little orange arrow. And the way that this command works is super simple. You have the keyword print followed by a set of parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, you tell it what you want it to print. And once you've inserted that, then when this line of code gets executed by the computer, it'll know to simply print or output the thing that you've placed in between the parentheses. But notice here that it's not just the word hello world exclamation mark that I've put inside my parentheses. I've also added some quotation marks or double quotes around the word. And the reason why I've done this is so that I can tell the computer that this bit here in between the double quotes is not code. It's not like print where it's supposed to do something. This is just some text that I've made up that I want it to print out. And these pieces of text in programming lingo is known as strings. And you can imagine it as almost like a pearl necklace, right? It's a string of characters. And what the double quotes do is they basically show the beginning and the end of that string of characters. So that means you have to be really careful when you're typing. For example, if I go ahead and I miss out the closing double quote, well, now you can see that there's some changes that have happened to our code already. Namely that the last parentheses, instead of being colored in white like the opening parentheses or how it used to be, it's now colored in orange. And this is a subtle hint to us. You're going to get really attuned to these subtle hints because they are the clues that will tell you what might have gone wrong in your code. If I run this code as it is right now, it's going to break. It's going to give me a syntax error. And it says something that seems like it's completely not English. So how can we figure out what this means? Now, the thing I want you to know is that all programmers make mistakes. We all make lots of errors, like forgetting to add the double quotes at the end of the string, or forgetting to add a closing parentheses. These things are just common errors because we're human. But the thing that differentiates great programmers is we're really good at figuring out what the problem is and how to fix it. So you can imagine that coding is just a whole bunch of problems that you have to solve. And in this case, when we get some sort of red text on the right and our code is not doing what we expect it to do, then all we have to do is take this entire error message where it says something, something error, and this is some sort of message that we're supposed to understand. And we're simply going to drop it into Google. And usually the first link you come across will be from a website called stackoverflow.com. And this is basically the Q&A website that all developers will go to whenever something is wrong with their code or when they can't figure out how to do something. So if we click on this link, you can see that somebody else has also had this error, and some kind souls have told us that the solution might be the fact that you're missing a double quote before the end of the line. So if we take a look back at our code, the code that generated this error looks like this. And indeed, we are missing a double quote at the end of our string. As you're learning to code, as you're going through your 100 days, I want you to become more and more attuned to the color of your code. Because one of the most helpful things that code editors such as this do for us is something called syntax highlighting. For example, when I was missing that double quote, it highlighted this entire thing in this orange color. And that is basically it telling us, it seems like this whole thing is some text. It thinks that all of this is a string and that we're missing a closing parenthesis. So if you notice this and you're like, wait, actually, that's not right. This part should be orange because this is what I want to be printed. But this part should match the color of the open brace, which is white. So there must be something wrong here. And indeed, if you have a look at the error message, it actually has a little caret sign right here showing you that there's something that's probably not right here. And it might jog your memory that, oh yeah, I've forgotten a closing double quote. And now when we run our code, you'll see that it's good as new. So now it's your turn to try it out in a code challenge. Head over to the next lesson, and then I'll guide you through getting started on your first coding challenge. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Throughout this course, we'll be getting you involved in a lot of these interactive coding exercises. And the idea is that you're not just sitting here watching me talk, that you're actually putting everything you're learning into practice. That way, it actually becomes your own. These coding exercises are great because we can give you instructions and show you what should happen if you write the correct code, what it needs to do, and you'll be able to write your code as well as see it run in the console. And it's through a lot of these exercises that you're going to level up and you're going to become a better coder. So in order to enroll, head over to this URL. And if you don't want to type it in, you can head over to the course resources and you'll be able to get a direct link there. And the first thing I want you to do is to go ahead and click on the fork button. Now, the important thing here is this is the output that we want to see down here in the console. And when you hit run, this is what should happen. Now, remember that I want you to have exactly the same characters printed out as I've got here, including where the spaces are, including the symbols like these single quotes, etc. Now is the time for you to head over to this challenge and try to complete it. Pause the video now and complete this challenge. All right, how did you get on? I really hope you gave this a good go because it's in these moments where you're going to be learning the code. Unfortunately, no amount of listening to me talk is actually going to give you these skills. It's only when you actually try it out and get the computer to do the thing that you want it to do, that's when you become the master of the computer, also known as a programmer. So in this case, the instructions are pretty simple. We have to use what we learned about the print statement to output these 3 lines. And notice how in this GIF, the lines are printing out in separate lines. This one gets printed, then this one, then this one. But because it happens so fast, it seems like as if they're getting printed as a single block. So we're told to write our code below this line. And we know that in order to print something, we use the print function with a set of parentheses. And inside the parentheses is where we tell it what we want it to print. So in the first instance, it's day 1, space, then it's Now, it's really easy to make spelling mistakes, but I really encourage you to actually type out anything that you put into your code rather than just simply copying and pasting it. Now, of course, it works exactly the same way. I could just copy and paste the code in here, but it's often in these cases where you make mistakes, like, for example, forgetting to add the double quotes around the text that you want to print. I really recommend just typing out the code for practice whenever you're doing these code challenges. Now, the last line that we want to print is a little bit complicated. It's almost like print inception, because what we want to print is this function. This is how we write our function. And that has to go inside here, inside a set of double quotes. So let's open up our double quotes and then write our print statement. And in this case, I'm actually using a single quote, and I'll tell you just in a little moment why that is. So let's add that single quote and finally the closing parentheses. This now is the entire code that you would need to be able to print something out. And when I go ahead and click run, you can see that the output looks exactly the same as what we've got here in the GIF. This is what we want, and I've now completed the coding challenge. Now, coming back to this single quote, why is it that I've got a single quote here rather than a double quote, which is what we've been using all this time? Well, because in Python, it doesn't actually care whether if you enclose these strings, so these pieces of text that are not to be interpreted as code, inside single quotes or inside double quotes. It is identical to the computer. This honey badger literally doesn't care. But if you had a set of double quotes and then you wanted another set of double quotes inside the double quotes, so for example, if I replace this with double quotes, you'll see that already the syntax highlighting is already screaming out to us. There's something that's not quite right here, because the colors are not the same as here, where the print function is in a particular color, the parentheses are in a particular color, and the text that is to be printed is in a yet another different color. In this case, it looks all jumbled up, and we're getting some errors here. So now if I hit run, you'll get syntax errors. And the problem here is, of course, our code thinks that the end of this string is here. And so it doesn't know what on earth is going on afterwards. And instead, it's seeing this as a string, this as a string, and this is being interpreted as code. So when we want to use some double quotes inside another set of double quotes, commonly you'll see people switch to single quotes instead. So you could, for example, write the print statement like so and use double quotes if you want to print those out. Or you can do it the other way, which is what I had before, where we use our double quotes on the outside and single quotes on the inside. So have a play around with that if that's at all confusing. But once you've tried it a few times and switched it around a few times, it should become clear what it's actually doing. How did you get on with this challenge? If you ever need to see the solution, it's always down here as a link. So if I go ahead and paste that link into my browser, then you'll see word for word the solution to each of these challenges. And hopefully that'll help you along the way while you're learning as well. So I hope you enjoy this challenge. In the next lesson, we're going to get back to learning about Python, and we're going to learn about strings and string manipulation. For all of that and more, I'll see you there. All right, guys, let's get back to learning about a few more things that we can do with strings. You saw in the last lesson that if we wanted to print things on individual lines, then we actually had to write them a few times, right? We had to write print on 3 lines if we wanted it to be printed 1, 2, 3, like so. Now, in this lesson, I want to show you a method where we can do the same thing, but by using a single print method, so saving ourselves a few characters. So the way that we would create a new line is by writing a backslash and the N character. And now if I go ahead and write hello world again afterwards and I hit run, or you can always use the shortcut, which is Command Enter on Mac or Control Enter on Windows. And you can see that once that line of code has been executed, I've got Hello World printed on two separate lines, separated by this pink \n character, which gets replaced by a new line. So go ahead and give that a go and see if you can create another one. Remember though, it's a backslash and not a forward slash, but the syntax highlighting should help you. All right, we can simply just add another \n, and remember that unless you want a space to appear right before where your hello world appears, you actually don't want any gaps between each of these lines. There we go. We've got the same result as before, but now using only a single print statement and creating some new lines with the \n. Now, one of the other things that we can do with strings is we can concatenate them. What this means is we combine different strings so that they will be added to the end of another string. Here's an example. Let's say that we had the word hello, and I wanted to add my name to the end of this word to make it a single string. Well, I can combine two strings by simply using a plus sign. So I can write hello plus Angela. Now, here's a question. When this runs, what do you think it will look like? Do you think it'll write hello space Angela or hello Angela all in one word? Let's see what happens. You can see that these two strings have now been combined into one, and there's no space in between because we don't have a space character anywhere in here. Pause the video and see if you can add a space in between. All right, so there's two ways that you can do this, or maybe three actually. You could add a space to the end of hello, you could add a space to the beginning of Angela, or you can actually continue using string concatenation by simply adding another string in between these two, and this one is just a space. So now when I run my code, you can see the space gets inserted, and this long thing gets combined into a single string that looks like this once this bit of the code gets executed. If we think of strings as a string of connected characters, then string concatenation is simply taking those separate strings of characters and merging them into one. Now, this is a good point to mention that in Python programming, spaces are really, really important. And what I mean by this is not so much the spaces that are inside strings like this one, but the spaces that you add in your code. So here, my print statement, if I hit the backspace, you can see that nothing happens. I can't go any further back. But if I added a space, or if I added a tab using the tab key, then you'll see that when I try to run my code, I actually get an error. And the type of error this time is not a syntax error anymore. It's now an indentation error. And it says that there's an unexpected indent at this position, right at the beginning of the print statement. So when you're coding in Python, it's really important that you start off all of your code at the beginning of the line and that you don't accidentally have any spaces or any tabs that you've inserted in front of the line of code. And the next time you get an indentation error, then you'll be able to look at where that error is, and hopefully you'll be able to either use Stack Overflow or just remember what this error message means, and you'll be able to fix your code. Now, this is the second error that we've come across. The last error was a syntax error. For example, when we forgot to add the end double quotes. And this one is called a syntax error, and this one is called a indentation error. And as I mentioned before, while you're coding, you are going to make lots and lots of these errors and other ones. This is the only sure thing that we know. So it's great that you're already learning about them and recognizing them, but how can we prevent this from happening in the first place? Well, paying attention while you're typing helps, but we all get tired, and sometimes, especially when I'm coding at night, sometimes even when I look at my own name, it looks like it's spelt wrong, and I can't figure out left from right. So in most cases, text editors have a lot of helpful features. If you go into the settings bar here and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see that there's something called Code Intelligence. And Code Intelligence is something that is going to help you autocomplete some of the functions, like our print function here, and give you some helpful information or hints as you type. So let's go ahead and change it to enabled and close down our settings pane. And you can see now, if I, for example, forget to add my double quotes, then I already start to get a little red squiggly line here and a little red bit in the right hand side of the scroll bar. And if I hover over the red squiggly line, you can see that it gives me the error that I would get if I ran my code right now. And so it reminds me that, oh yeah, there's maybe something about my string that's not quite right. And you can also just Google these error messages and see it in Stack Overflow to remind yourself of what the error might be relating to. And I can fix it without having to run my code and having it break. Because remember that when you're writing large programs, it's not just going to be one line of code. You could have multiple lines of code, each with their own errors. For example, this one might be missing a double quote. This one might be missing a plus sign. This one might have the print function misspelled. The next one might have a indentation that's not meant to be there. And when you run your code like this, it'll only give you the first issue. Once you fix that issue, it'll continue to the next issue until you've fixed everything. And this is really painful. But with Code Intelligence enabled, every time we make an error, such as a indentation error like this, then we'll be able to hover over it and you'll see unexpected indent. So we'll be able to fix that. If we forget to close off our print statement, then we'll get a little squiggly line next to it. And if we say misspelled our print statement, we'll also get errors telling us that undefined name, or it doesn't know what this PRNT is. And the syntax highlighting also changes, and everything should all help you to avoid mistakes and write good, solid code. So now it's time for another code challenge. And in this code challenge, I've got a whole bunch of broken code for you. And your job is to debug or remove the bugs from the code and make the code run without any errors. This word debugging actually comes from a story where back in the 80s, a moth actually flew into one of the early computers and it got electrocuted, unfortunately, for the moth. And for the programmer, it meant that his code wasn't performing as he would expect it to. So he actually had to go into the computer, pick out the moth, and fix the wires so that it would work again. Now, we don't have any moths flying around in our code, thankfully, but what we do have to do is we have to pick out the errors so that our code will run in the way that we expect it to, without any errors. So head over to the next lesson and try out your first debugging exercise. To begin, I want you to locate the day 1.2 debugging exercise. And now, as you did before, go ahead and read through the instructions. Be mindful that the output must match the example output precisely. And when you hit run, this is the outcome you're looking for. So there's quite a few things broken here, but I want you to have a go at fixing each line individually and pulling out the bugs from the code. So pause the video now and give that a go. All right, so how did that go? If you haven't got your computer in front of you, if you're traveling, if somehow you can't access the exercise, just pause, and when you've got time, then complete the challenge and then come back to the course. It is so important that you actually do some hands-on stuff, and I stress that this is the only way that you're going to become the rockstar coder that I know you can be. Let's take a look at the code below. You can see that when we run our code as it is right now, we get an error, and this is going to point to the first of many errors in this file. And in this case, it tells us that on line 3, so this one right here, at around this position or somewhere around here, as denoted by the little caret sign, there is a syntax error. If we study this closely, you can see that the code highlighting seems to be suggesting that all of this is code, but this is somehow text. So what's going on here? Well, notice that we've only got one double quote. So it thinks that what comes after this is the text, but what comes before it, it thought it was just continuation of code. So to fix this one, all we have to do is add a double quote right here. That changes the text to the color that we're used to, and this fixes this line. So if we run our code now, we should get a different error, and indeed we do. The next one tells us that on line 5, so this one right here, there is an indentation error. There's an unexpected indent somewhere around here on line 5. So let's take a look at line 5, and there you go. There's a little bit of extra space between the print and the beginning of the line. So now that we've fixed that one, let's click run, and it will point to another line of code that's broken. And in this case, it says on line 7, which is here where there's actually no code, there's the unexpected EOF while parsing. What does this mean? Well, if you're not sure, then go ahead and paste it into Google. And let's take a look at what people say on Stack Overflow. So as this person, very kind, Felix, has explained, the syntax error unexpected EOF while parsing means that the end of your source code was reached before all code blocks were completed. What is a code block? Well, this is a code block because it's a print function, it has a beginning, and it has an end. But what does this line not have? Well, it's got 2 open parentheses, but only 1 closing parentheses. So the computer thinks that you're going to continue writing something and then close it off at the end, which is not the case. In fact, what has happened is we simply have an extra misplaced open parenthesis. And now if we delete that and hit run, you'll see that we have everything printed. But at this point, notice how on line 4, which is the line that we haven't fixed yet, it prints string concatenation is done with the blank sign, whereas in fact it should say plus sign. And even though we don't see any errors being printed in our console, you'll see that we have an output mismatch, because I'm expecting to see this line, string concatenation is done with the plus sign, but here the output doesn't have that part, is missing this part. So there's one last thing that you need to debug, and that is of course on line 4. And what's happening here is we have this part being interpreted as a string, this part being interpreted as a string, and it thinks that this plus sign is just us concatenating these 2 parts together, which is why it printed out like this. But in fact, what we wanted to print out is this as text down here. So what we have to do is to change this outer part from double quotes into single quotes. And now you can see when it highlights this part, it's all the same color, including the plus sign. Now it sees this as a complete string, and it's not looking at this as if it's code. So now if we run our program, you can see the entire sentence being printed out. So if you've completed the challenge and you've gotten everything right, then you're now done with this exercise. If you got stuck and you want to have a look at the solution, as always, it's down here. And it might be useful to have a look at this page to see where you might have missed something or where you might have gotten something wrong. So I hope you enjoyed this code exercise. In the next lesson, we're going to learn about a new type of Python function, which is the input function. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.